Hi, welcome to the Rob and Bird podcast. I'm Rob.
And I'm Bird. We're here to bring hope and motivations to those in the struggle. We're in it too. We cannot afford to give up.
We're basically cheerleaders. The road to success will be hard, but we want you to know you're not alone.
All right, well, let's get to it, Rob. What do we have diving into today's episode?
You know what's missing in today's world? Humility.
What? No, yeah, it kind of is. Well, in the internet, I think.
I mean, in the age of the internet, like you can find information in a moment's notice, and suddenly you're an expert at everything and anything.
Yes, you learned kung fu, like how Neo,
Yeah, I
like
I,
how Neo
I
did.
just watched a movie and suddenly I know kung fu.
Yes. Oh, and the ways of the Jedi.
Mm.
Nah, but yeah, it's been pretty crazy. Seeing what happens in the internet when arguments ensue or points are brought across on different realms of people, and what happens is like what sucks is that there's always someone in disagreements, and then you even have those who just troll, and it's like for fun for them, but then they're also just trying to get someone all bent out of shape, and it creates this rift between people.
Well, disagreement isn't the problem. It's the lack of consideration that I might be wrong that is. Like my best friend and I argued a fair bit in high school. And he's still my best friend. Um like we would argue until we were sweating. And this is just through text messages about things as like I remember one of the arguments that we would have is I argued on behalf of fate, as in like the Greek ideas of the three fates weaving, and he would argue in for free will,
Hmm.
and we would argue for a while, and then one of I don't remember who it was, but one of us was like, okay, let's stop. How are you feeling? I'm sweating. Yeah, me too.
It's like a mental boxing match, and then you start going, "Oh, let's take a minute. My nose is twisted."
But it's good to have arguments like that because you're trying to understand other people's perspective, and that's a very important thing, and it's something that's not really done today.
Yeah.
I think.
No, I can see that point. Yeah, there are times like I am more. I tread carefully when I can, like when I'm aware where what topic is being talked about, like in a group of friends, like very sensitive topics, and political, and even just fan stuff. But you and I know it's like it gets to a point where you're like you still have to make the effort to be honest with them because you want them to know your thoughts, your what you're noticing and what you think they may be noticing wrong or missing, and they should do the same for you. Um, but it just kind of gets to a point where I listen and I try to take things patiently, and even if they come in without realizing it, what they're saying can be insulting, I would tell them in return, hey, I see where you might be coming from, but this is how I'm perceiving this information.
Going off from the backdrop of our last discussion about hardship, like I think that's one of the reasons why we are lacking in humility today is because the lack of with the age of the internet, you're not forced to interact with people you don't like, and sometimes you do have to interact with people you don't like, and you have to find common ground. You have to find, you have to figure out, you have to compartmentalize. We're working on an assignment. Where our objective is to work on the assignment. If you don't get along on anything else, let's just focus on this. And maybe through that labor that we're both working on, we might come from two different backgrounds, uh, oh, and we have to come together to solve that problem, right?
Yeah, like kind of sitting. I mean, I've seen even discussions made on other channels, like on YouTube, but it's kind of like it feels rushed. and so like organized setup wise that and it makes sense, it has to be, so the topic is coming across accurately and consistent. But what happens is sometimes, like, what I think it's parable is when we know what we're about to get into, we kind of come out from a defensive perspective that's a little too much. And what sucks is that I think people will not always, like, for the sake of us obtaining knowledge and trying to understand the answer, like, the issues that we're really facing, like the core root of it. Some of us don't want to get to the root of the issue to figure out what we can create as a solution or figure it out, but want to win the argument alone. And it's like how can you be a person of humility if you start lying, you start to say things like, "Yep, I saw it. That happened. It actually happened." And no one knows for sure if you're saying the truth. You're coming out of a place that you just want to take over the argument because you have no other things to prove and say it's true. And it's such a, like, I've had seen it before where I knew someone in a discussion and I've seen where they were at the time about the issue they were talking about, and they're like, "Yeah, it did happen. It happened just like this." And I was like, "Not sure about that." Like, it's kind of fishy the way it's coming out. But on the part of humility, for example, like, I'd say for me, when I've said this to you before too, when I was growing up in America, we get all these conveniences. We don't realize because it's such a normalized thing. And when I went to go visit my family in their farm on my mom's side, my aunts and uncles they work a farm life all their lives. Only a few of them, the oldest siblings of her. And so it's like when I start realizing where my food comes from and all the hard work put on the land and how organized they need to be for the seasons, growing all those foods like plantains, lemons, fruits, like mangoes. They're growing their chickens and eggs, and how these things are taken care of if they want to eat meat. And it did bring me to a level where I realized, man, I live in such a nice reality, you know. Uh, Whereas these guys are in the sun and they're working. And he brought me in when I was a kid, and I just watched and learned a little. And he's like, this is where your food comes from, son. That kind of mentality. And he wasn't trying to make me feel like guilty about where I'm from, but to understand and remember that this is what it's coming from. Those who live this life on the land, they know how to survive, and they're appreciative to a much larger degree because their hands have been there. Their effort has been there to maintaining the lives of the animal livestock, to the fruits and vegetables. And we just go to a supermarket and buy it in a packet, you know? Um, so it's something that I thought was unique and wonderful to learn, and made me much more, like, again, where humility kind of kicks in, to appreciate all of that. Even when I went to New York, my mind was different.
You think that's bad? With our current day, like they're like the eggs that weren't the perfect size, they would be tossed out, or if they were a different color, they would be moved set aside. Same thing with apples. Same thing with oranges. Anything that doesn't fit a certain mold, those would be tossed aside. Like there's so much waste
Damn.
in yeah, there's so much waste in America today with because everything has to be set up perfectly. You you need your red delicious apple. It can't be any other colors. And there's a bit of a tragedy there in that we can't accept anything but perfection or what we perceive as perfection.
Yeah.
And so when we do that, we accept other things which might not be as perfect.
Yeah, that's kind of a, yeah, that's a insane way to think of things.
I mean,
Because it's damn.
think about pesticides. What are pesticides? Pesticides is a poison. I'm not going to say that we shouldn't use pesticides. I don't know. I'm not that intelligent. But pesticides are a poison to keep rodent. I'm not sure if it's rodents, but certainly, well, it says pesticide. That means it kills pests. So it's probably rodents. It's definitely insects, things that would eat our crops. And then when we harvest those, we're also eating those pesticides, or at least it's these crops are grown with pesticides. It's hard. I wonder how hard it actually is to extract those pesticides from whatever we're eating.
Yeah, I don't know to that degree. I only know enough that like depending on where you're growing the food, like what part of the land and what sort of challenges you're faced with on that environment is what you must do to maintain the crop. But I mean, it just sucks because it's the trade off. You know, you don't want your crops to die, so you got to use something that's pretty poisonous for these insects from killing, from eating your crops and destroying all of that. Uh, but it's like that's a whole nother discussion where it's like
Yeah,
what are their
that
options?
is quite
Yeah,
a that's I'm just using that as an example. That is there are we can
yeah,
argue to to the end of days about the legitimacy of any decisions that we make on a national or any large scale points, right?
yeah. It's yeah it's but going back to it, it's just um I'll say like if I didn't have that experience with my mom and my uncle and my grandmother, seeing what I saw, like, and they were respectful to the animals, and these are to mention like how we get our meat. Like they don't, it's not like how people would assume when, especially people who are like anti, they're like either vegetarian of that sort and hate meat, like hate the killing of animals. It's not just like a factory that just does these things. It's from what I've seen, like on my family side, they do it humanely and respectfully, and they don't do it on a massive scale. No one, like at that point is usually when animals are really old and they're not, they don't have much left and time to live. So, and they do it in a very painless way. There's ways of doing it that it's not. But with that said, it it's how like we get our meat in so many formats. And of course, in the US, we get it, I'd say in New York City, right? We get it like probably through factories and stuff and shipped to corporations very cheaply.
I'd say for America as a whole, it's mostly factory killing, which, well, we can argue about that. I'm sure there's someone
Yeah.
who's going to argue that point.
Yeah. I mean, I won't go there because I don't know the full information, but like from what they do in the farms, it's you gotta really like appreciate, understand, and look at that side before you go off saying like we have it like we like it's not to say we don't have it bad in the U.S. We do at times in other factors, but when it comes to the access to food, work, these type of things, it just made me feel more appreciative and in a privilege. Because I even met a kid too. Actually, reminds me. Um, I hung out with him for some time when I was in that country, and then he just said something around the lines where he said he had to stop going to school because he had to go work with his father, not at a farm but in a construction company, and he was like the oldest of his brothers, and he, man, he told me some stuff like yeah, like he wasn't trying to sound sad story, but he was just saying yeah, it's just something I had to do. He's like I had to drop out of the I think fourth grade or something, and I was like oh man, and then I thought like what did he want to become, and I asked him and stuff like what was his dream, and in my head, this is where I misinterpreted. I thought he said he wanted to be a basketball player, so um, I didn't have much money, but I left to a $20 bill, and I drew some drawings on what he could learn, like steps to play basketball, like the rules, like double dribble and don't walk when you're dribbling. You don't, and defensive moves from what I learned from school. And it was before I had to leave, so I drew these and then I left. But then I learned later on that he actually said baseball, but I left with the $20 to buy a basketball. I wrote a letter, and so
That is
you know,
completely different.
yeah, So, but regardless, I mean, I know $20. You probably could use it for something else, but I really sincerely hope that he does find the the chance in his life to obtain that chance. Just to be what he wants to be a baseball player. And if he's out there, yeah, I really hope so. Like, because at the end, it's like the little moments like that when you get like a hearing a little of a person's life, just a stranger, and you kind of you see yourself when you have humility in your heart, man. You see yourself in them, so you just and granted, you could say, oh, he could have been manipulating you, but so be it, maybe. But I did know that when I kept seeing him come over and visit his friends would play near my grandma's home, and she was just more of a person that was open to children if they wanted to come play or wanted fruit, and they loved it. But then they also like they had to go to school, and with this kid, he had to go to work with his dad.
And then there's the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm listening to this podcast called Three Kingdoms podcast with a Three Kingdoms with a three, with a numerical three,
Mm.
and it's interesting to hear about the protagonist of the story uh, who who's named Liu Bei. Liu Bei. In the for people who don't know what that name means. First off, protagonist, but the name Liu is the family that founded the Han dynasty, for which the Three Kingdoms is about the end of. So Liu Bei is a descendant of the founders of the current dynasty. And at the beginning of the story, Liu Bei is a mat weaver. His somewhere above his somewhere in the past, one of his ancestors, I think it was his grandfather, made some bad decisions, and that led his father into destitution until Liu Bei himself was a mat weaver, and he and when the during the Three Kingdoms period, he went on to become a hero of the Han dynasty, uh, because he couldn't accept that his because he had this legacy of that family name. He had to make sure it endured.
Mm.
But it's only what was that from that television show? I know you don't know, but something about uh it is only through chaos that people like a humble mat weaver can become a great hero.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's an interesting quote.
Because it's a bit of like Liu Bei was a person for which he should have been something better by birth, but he because of his family's history, he wasn't wasn't able to become one of the heirs to the emperor, so he went down in stature because of his grandfather, and then he came back up even to be called the uncle of the emperor, because the current emperor was a Liu, because if you don't know how Chinese families worked. It like you people, the emperor had a lot of wives, so large
Yeah.
family trees. So uh,
Oh
yeah,
damn. Yeah, that's a lot of. It's a lot of situations that could happen with that kind of family tree. I'd say that.
yeah. But I mean, going back to the point about like trying to understand different perspectives, I think that a lot of people, I hope a lot of people are against war, but if you people who do hate war should try to talk to soldiers, try to talk to people who actually have a good argument about why we should go to war, right? I think that it's important to seek out a counter argument, not just a a straw man, a good counter argument, something that would convince you under other circumstances. Like because maybe you're wrong about what it is you're talking about, and if you eat meat, talk to a vegan, or if you are in favor of nuclear, talk to a green energy person.
Yeah, it's good to have a discussion on the opposite side, and I agree that. Like I think I remember seeing too. It's like there's been discussions where people who are against animals, like the slaughter places and for animals and stuff for food, and but then when they had discussions with farmers, the farmers describe what they actually do to maintain and keep the animals and the livestock happy, to live a long happy life before it comes to that point.
I know I know that there's there are a lot of these farmer YouTubers. One in particular, uh, like started a farm from being a city person. Went bought a ranch, raised a bunch of poultry, and to this day he has not killed his own uh what was it chickens was it chickens. I think it was chickens and ducks and geese or something. I don't quite remember. It's been a while, but he tried to treat his animals humanely for whatever that means. And I think that that's a perspective that's lost as a result of the factory farming. We have the assumption that all these farmers must be this way, which isn't true.
Yeah, no, it's not. If anything, it's more of a it's more I wouldn't say like just personalized, but deeper. It's deep. It's just a deep connection with the animals that they're with. And they understand. Yeah, it reminds me of like there was a farmer that worked. He maintained these chickens. He maintained the temperature and where they were living in, and knew what was dangerous for their well-being and what was safe for their well-being to keep them happy, comfortable, and having a long life. And so he said that a comment that people wouldn't assume off the bat, where he just said, this is like my other home. Like I take care of them and I keep them happy, and it makes me happy. He would say, uh, as they're living there, they're not just shoved into some corner in a box, like some places do. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, I think that there's a real disconnect between, and I've told you about this thought, is that there's a disconnect between us city folk and them country boys.
oh yes, yeah. No, it's. I mean, there is at times because if it's someone from the city believing that they're of a higher in any thinking like a higher status, whatever, just because they happen to be there, live there. It's just a different way of life. But when you see and live a little of the other side, you either learn to appreciate it or you're just like, oh god, like because I've seen some people are just like, I would never do this. It's like, but that's how we have what we have in the city. It's like saying I would never do electrician's work or a plumber's work, or it's like, are you crazy? Like then you won't have anything if someone didn't like doing what this they did, you know?
Someone had to do it. I've I've done things like that.
No, I was gonna say like, I mean like for me, my other job that made me appreciate it was like when I worked at an ice cream shop. First job, first job of the day, I had to scrape gum, gunk, things with this like filer thing onto the tiles in the corners, like bunched up dirty sprinkles and stuff like that. And I was basically doing cleanup work at every corner of the ice cream shop. And then I would see people just dump stuff like haphazardly, like a whole soda in a garbage can. And when you see that, you're gonna go, I gotta bag that up and hope it doesn't spill, which it spilled in the bag, and that there isn't a hole in the bag. And once in a while, that happens. But those moments, like cleaning after someone and all that, uh, and then dealing with customers that would say horrible things when they make demands for how much like ice cream they want, and when they change their mind after you serve them, and then they complain, and you still have to have patience, and it makes you realize you have to build yourself up to be a more patient person, even when things are not fair on the serving level. But I think like those type of jobs, they make you realize like you know like to be more kind to other people in the service industry, and because they go through a lot, you'd be surprised, and they're just like you and I, but yet they don't get treated the same.
I mean, I try to think. I try to live my life as in don't make someone else's life worse.
Yeah, yeah, and that's not to, and just to quickly say, that's not to say that oh, there aren't any terrible waiters or messed up service members of what said industry, like police, or there are great people and there are terrible people, and it just comes with the territory in these industries. But when you, yeah, if you have someone being just poorly mannered to you, then obviously you don't have to stick around that person and take it. You could tell them to back off, and they need to recognize that they need to show some respect. But with those who do what they're supposed to do, they do their job, the function, and you know, they deserve that level of respect and they dignity and like. But I think again, going back to work industry stuff, from what I've learned, working at a restaurant and ice cream shop and stuff, it teaches you to a degree of humility if you notice when you're put on the spot of like handling some angry customer their order, and you're just like, oh my god, they're not even being fair. It kind of brings you down, but then you realize how you appreciate um what you have and all that.
It's that the immortalized words of I forget what her name is, but let them eat cake. While
Oh.
while that isn't a true quote, um, Marie Antoinette, that's what her name was. Well, that's not a accurate depiction, from what I understand. It symbolized how the peasants of France were feeling, because you have all these people that were living their high life in the French aristocracy, while the lowly peasants were suffering, and which, going back to what I was talking about with the Three Kingdoms, that's how the Three Kingdoms period started. Yeah, there was a drought in the Yangtze River. It didn't get it. I don't remember the exact situation, but there was a drought, and so the Yellow Turban, the peasants of China, they were forced to give whatever food that they had to their lords or whatever, and they didn't have any food to eat for themselves, and so these nobles and warlords, they would have their food and they would give it to the emperor. And in Luoyang, they were living in a separate world full of people who were living in their own political world, divorced from the reality of the common person. And eventually, someone, I forget his name, but the great healer got tired of this and decided the empire, the emperor must fall for the people to for the sake of the people, and that led to the start of the Yellow Turban Rebellion.
Hmm. Damn.
But that's the importance of being able to look at the what other people are going through, because yeah, maybe they're screaming, maybe they're yelling, but does the other person have something valid to say?
Yeah, I could see that. It's, I mean, because down the line, like if you can't, man, if you can't relate, yeah, I feel like sometimes it's better to go out there and step into that realm of that person's reality, so that you can understand why they are in the stance that they have. You know, their in their beliefs. The example of the sax musician player who befriended the clans member. Do you remember that one?
I know who you're
You've
talking
told
about.
me
I
this
don't remember
before.
his name off my right now.
Just wanted to say that he was willing to want to talk to this individual who's a clans member to get him to know him, because he had that phrase. He said, "How could you hate me if you don't know me? If you don't know anything about me?" Um, and so I think it takes a great level, of patience and humility to talk to someone who could have such a dismissive hatred on you, and not have, an understanding of who you are as a person.
Yeah. Uh, maybe humility is all about curiosity of what is the other person experiencing that I'm not seeing.
Yeah, because you're giving yourself the opportunity to take a chance in learning why someone is the way they are about something you would go, you're against. And it's very important to understand those things, the other side. We It's hard for us to do sometimes, unfortunately, especially in social media, where we're kind of quick to take sides when we see a point thrown across, and it seems valid all the way through until someone else comes in with another comment and says otherwise, and then they go, "Oh yeah,
I mean, you know how opinionated I can be.
yeah." No, I mean, but at least you're not so closed off, because there are times where some people would just be so closed off, they don't see how another can relate nor understand, and sometimes it leads them to believing they yet to be a certain color or a certain race to truly understand, when in reality that all it takes is patience, humility, for one another, because in that way we become much more closer as human beings, and we learn that lesson, and then those lessons we can pass it on to our children so they could avoid these sort of oppositions to such high degrees.
I think that that's another thing that's lacking in today's world is that there is a lack of humility in understanding the struggles of our past. That that we are above all that. And I remember having arguments with people online about, oh well, your ancestors were so terrible because they did something, um, they did something wrong, and I was just thinking they didn't have a lot of food to eat, so they had to do some messed up things in order to make sure that they survived.
Yeah.
Like if like to go harken back to the point about like if you eat meat, or talk to a vegan, on the opposite measure, think about the cavemen, and my arguments will always go back to cavemen. They didn't know how to farm yet. That's first and foremost. They didn't know how to farm yet. So what are they going to do to survive? In order for you to exist, they had to go out and hunt and eat whatever they found.
Yeah, they had to follow where the food was and be nomadic about it, because if they stayed in one area for too long and then food was not available as much, it's like, okay.
Well, the nomad part is happenstance because of the hunter gatherer societies.
Yeah.
Because, but it's once we started understanding how to farm, that's when you start getting people to become more sedentary, because you have to stay still in order to plant your crops and let it grow.
Yeah. It's yeah, it's a lot. Even like I wouldn't say, I mean, I don't know my history like to that degree too much, but I know enough that yeah, like we our species for a time had to travel to find food and see where it was. And then what sucks is like when you try something you don't know and you're really hungry, you don't realize that mushroom could be real poisonous. Like, and then oof, yeah, it turns nasty at that point.
That's a
But
whole topic that, like a lot of things, there are quite a number of different topics that can be unpacked, and that is a mess unto itself.
yeah,
But I think that's important. Like it's important to one of the reasons it's important to understand is like it expands your how you understand things. So if you're trying, like if you're a if you most people probably don't know how to do blacksmithing, but if you like talk to a blacksmith, maybe watch a blacksmith, and by understanding how people do things, you get an appreciation for what they're doing. And when you do that, I think that it can make you can better represent what it is that you're doing if you're doing art, or if you're doing craftsmanship. Like you get a better understanding of how the process works, and once again, it'll make your craft better.
yeah, I definitely see that.
The other thing is like no one likes a know-it-all. Because
What?
yeah.
But I know everything, Rob. You can ask me. Come on, I'm your friend.
I
You know why the sky is blue?
well, it's because of light refraction.
No, I'll tell you later after this podcast. Jeez,
You're gonna hide it
Rob.
from people. Okay, be that way. But
No, go
but
on. Wait.
you're gonna meet people that are gonna say whatever their things. And I remember one person uh kept going on about like all the stories, all his life experiences that he's had. And it was these were tall tales. And I remember listening to it. It took me a few months. I'll grant I was that gullible that it took me a few months. But after a few stories too many, I started thinking about it. I started listening to some of these stories and kept thinking that doesn't make sense, especially when it comes to things that are like he was making himself out to be some sort of super spy or whatever. It started getting to that point, and I remember thinking, okay, I've I've went to school and learned about science. More so, I have a brother who's in science, and I have a father who's a doctor in physics. I'm extremely confident what he's saying does not make sense. And it got to the point where I just blocked blocked him out of my in my head, you know?
Yeah.
Cuz these kind of people are obnoxious because they're always constantly talking about how great they are. But the kind of if you want to get anywhere, you have to be the person that's lifting other people up.
Yeah. And you also have to be willing to be wrong and understand why you're wrong. Because you just allow yourself to live a lie when you just stand there and say how right you are with other people, and especially people who like may not know better at the time.
You can't improve if you cannot admit you might be wrong. And I know back in high school there was a time where I was in a drawing class, and the teacher's a good being a good teacher walked around and criticized, this is what you're doing wrong, this in your drawing or whatever. And like I try to listen to my teacher, and in this case I did when we were doing self portraits. And she came to me and she looked at what I was drawing and said, the ears are wrong, they should be lower. And I said, no, it's that's not how it should be, because I can see it in the mirror. It like
Tell him, Rob. Tell
it lines up
him.
here. And she says, no, that's not how it is, do it again. And I said, okay, you're wrong, but I'm gonna do it as you said. A day later she comes back around, and she quietly tells me, you're right. Now, granted, at the time I was very upset because, like, okay, I just erased this and redrew the ears. Now I'm gonna have to erase it again and redraw the ears. But
Yeah.
after that week of being upset, I like she actually became one of my favorite art teachers in my life. So, like, I doubt she's ever gonna hear this, but Miss Shanahan, you're awesome.
You hear that, Miss Shanahan? Wherever you are. Rob said it. And he thinks I stole his half sandwich from college. It's a terrible accusation, everyone. I was very upset about that. I just want to
It's a
know
terrible
to let
accusation
everyone.
because it's true.
It's
There are
no, Rob.
witnesses.
We spoke about this so many times. Did not steal your half sandwich. I don't know who it was. Just swiftly grabbed it, just really fast, and I was like, "Whoa, what happened, Rob?" And then you were like, "What the hell, man? Where's my half sandwich?" I was like, "I don't know. Someone took it." And Rob, think about it. If I stole your half sandwich, would I have been able to speak to you in such a matter?
You are trying to
I think my mouth would be
leave.
full. Yes, because I had to go home. I was thoroughly exhausted.
Yeah, thoroughly exhausted stealing and eating my food.
We'll talk about this at a different episode, Rob. Ugh, this is too much for me. It's too much for my heart. Oh God, he just won't let it go with the half sandwich.
No, I won't.
No, but into the topic, definitely. Yeah, I think to say it for an ending here. Yeah, we gotta. My thoughts are just if we could be more patient with one another, just a little more, and hear the other side out. Like I wish, and I hope, and not that I wish, I hope. I'm sure this going out there is happening out there that uh people have discussions, open discussions of topics, whether they seem controversial and deep, that we do lend our ears and our hearts to it, and not get so caught up in the how could you think this is okay thinking, because that's a, I mean, granted, that's, we all have that happen in a discussion, but we still have to talk and be patient as we talk to each other, just enough that we're really listening and not listening with our heart and our mind just kind of at a front, like ready to defend our point with a strong bias, and not go, let me lower my defense a little and know when. It's like hard to tell, know when to lower it and when to build it up. Now, granted, we should uphold our values, but we have to make sure that we're not believing in such values that are twisted.
But isn't that what art is about? To have a discussion, to expose your thoughts to other people. And the best discussions are ones in which you are willing to admit you're wrong. You're so willing to admit you're wrong, you're willingly go and see the other side, what someone else has to say that opposes your own views. As C.S. Lewis says, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking yourself less.
That I never heard of. That sounds nice. But yeah, but there you have it, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and me and Rob are just going to talk about how I didn't steal his half sandwich after the show. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate you all. Definitely like and subscribe to our stuff if you want to hear more.
Thank you for listening. Have a good day, and do not let people steal your food.
No, this, I didn't do it. Let it go, Rob. It's okay. Everyone, I'm innocent in that case. Thank you, Rob. We'll talk to you later.